interesting to talk about the formation of the European Union and give a little context to it, because the European Union is very misunderstood by most people, I think, in Britain, and Africans less so, because maybe they're less interested in finding out about the history. But it's interesting, before we talk about the formation of the European Union, we need to give it some historical context, which is that there's a lot of language that is used in Western countries and a lot of language used in places like Britain that creates confusion. So for example, we talk on black violence, we talk about tribalism, we talk about conflict in Africa, we talk about all these language, but what we don't talk about is, let's just stop there a second and go to Europe. Let's ask this question: when in Europe's history has there not been war? And you'll struggle to find out where in history there hasn't been war in Europe. Europe has had a history of war. The foundation of the European Union, which was the Economic European Community, whatever it was called, the EEC was it was known as at the beginning, but there was loads of different structures. But the basic principle behind European integration was on the back of two major wars, which are described as World War I and World War II, which were actually Europeans fighting Europeans, white on white violence, ×2. Because it wasn't a world war, it was a war between Europe that involved the world. So we just get that straight. And it was another example of war in Europe. So the World War I, as it's known, and World War II was Europe fighting itself, massacring its own people. If you look at World War I, millions of Europeans died, killed by other Europeans. So when we say black on black violence, we need to be very careful using this kind of language. I don't like that kind of language, because most people who are killed in terms of general violence are killed by somebody who knows you. So most violence is domestic, most murders are domestic. So by nature, the chances of being killed by somebody outside of your community is unlikely anyway. So therefore, the concept of black on black violence is a nonsense, because most white people are killed by another white person. So we need to look at it in that context. So Europe, the whole premise of the European Union was on the back of, they didn't want any more wars between European countries. That was the basic founding members' concept, to stop the wars against each other. And if you look at the foundation of America, it's basically the same. Is that the United States of America was, the founding fathers of the United States of America was to prevent more war within the United States itself. People don't realize the White House, for example, the first White House was burnt down by the British because they fought with the British colonialism. Britain owned America, and then they fought for their independence, and the White House was burnt to the ground by the British. So there's lots of history of violence between, in Europe, between Europeans. So when you see the American Revolution, was that not white on white violence? It was only white people fighting other white people. When the North fought the South, and they said for independence and for the Union or for the Confederates in the South, that was white on white violence. And they got Africans involved because they needed our support in the North. So they promised us that they would end slavery if we joined them. So this is the context we're talking about. So the European Union was basically found on that basis. What was the basis for World War I? The basis for World War I, read the book The World and Africa by W.E.B. Du Bois. In that book, he says there were some major events in the world. And the major events in the 20th century, event number one was when the boat, a German warship, sailed into North Africa. Event number one, that's World War I. So why was World War I happen? Because Germany sailed into North Africa. Why did Germany sail into North Africa? What happened before World War I? Well, what happened before World War I was 1884, 1885, which is when Africa was split up. Yeah? When European leaders who owned the colonies effectively split Africa into different zones. So the end of the 19th century, that's what happened. When did World War I start? The beginning of the 20th century. So it was only a short period afterwards that Germany, being pissed, angry that they didn't get a slice of the cake, because where in Africa is there a German colony? They didn't get a slice of the cake. So they were angry about it, they didn't get a slice of the cake. So when the Germans didn't get a slice of the cake, they wanted a slice of the cake. They were a relatively powerful, strong nation in Europe, and they weren't getting a slice of the pie. So they marched into North Africa to say, we want a slice of this cake. And that was the beginning of the trigger of the First World War and therefore the Second World War. It was basically about Europe fighting itself over the colonies. That's basically what it's about. So the reason why the European Union was developed, because some of the leaders that were around at that time said we must never have war again. Places like France, for example, France was decimated. You can see so many different programs about French resistance and little jokes and little comments that make, where you see programs like Hello Hello and different programs like that where you saw the French resistance, and there's lots of different little examples. Even in The Great Escape, the film called The Great Escape, you see an example of when the British soldiers escaped. Who helped them? The French resistance. So France swore they will never have it happen again. France will never be occupied and controlled again. That's why France got nuclear weapons, and France said they're going to have a military, etc. So that's the kind of backdrop, and that's an important backdrop, but also what was going on. So one of the things with this situation was that was where Europe was uniting, but also at the same time, Africa was also moving in a different direction as well. So the fact that Europe had a war with itself weakened its hold over the colonies. It weakened Britain, because the war took so much effort out of Britain and so much decimation in Europe that at the end of the Second World War, Britain had to get a loan from America to rebuild itself. And Britain was indebted to America, and that's when America became a superpower and then became the preeminent power, and Britain's decline began. So Britain has been on the decline and America has been on the incline. So that's been the change and shift in power. So the British Empire basically had to concede to India, China, and loads of different places, which led to our independence. So interestingly, if you look at that history, the weakness in Europe and the problems that Europe were having made it easier for us to get our independence. And it made those weaknesses lead to our independence. So we need to realize that. So therefore, Brexit, when I come to talk about Brexit very shortly, the split of Europeans, the European Union, Britain leaving is a significant weakness in the European agenda in terms of European Union, because Britain is one of the most powerful, richest nations in the world. It therefore is a leading member of the European Union. It could lead to other members leaving. So if Britain gets a good deal, leaving the European Union, you could ask yourself, other countries in Europe could ask themselves, well, why are we in the European Union if Britain can get a good deal and be outside? Like any club, if you don't have to pay membership and get the benefits of the club, why would you stay a member? If I could still use my mobile phone but not pay for it, why wouldn't I get a mobile phone? So club membership normally means you get benefits. When you leave, you lose the benefits. It's simple, right? And if you've agreed to do things when you're in the club, when you leave early, you might have obligations you still have to pay for. So that's basically how it works.